Good morning, or as we say in East Tennessee, namaste, y'all. It's wonderful to be here. This is actually my first time in the great state of Michigan, and thank you. And it's wonderful to be here. I got picked up yesterday at the Detroit airport by my new friends, Colleen and Trey, and I met a wonderful storyteller called Trey, who gave me the insights to Ann Arbor, to Fleetwood Diner, took me to a wonderful dinner last night at the Air Museum, and showed me that big map on the wall, and said, that's Michigan. And he told me a story that once, a creation story that Michigans like to tell, that when God created the world, he put his hand on Michigan and created the rest of the world. And apparently it's like this, Michigan. Now, I always thought that's Scotland. Because stories cross borders, right? But after the referendum results this morning, I think Scotland's like this, and we're all moving to Canada. So I want to also thank Governor Wayne. We met last year in San Diego, and it was wonderful, and thank you for your invitation. This must be the first Rotary District with a theme of storytelling, so I'm especially pleased to be here, so thank you for doing that. I want to start off, first of all, with a quick show of hands. How many of you consider yourselves to be storytellers? That's good. I appreciate it. That's good. Well, today, as we explore the power of storytelling together in building community and as a social force for social change, I want to start by reminding you all that you are all storytellers. I am honored to be in the same room as storytellers of all kinds, hot-blooded believers in the promises of what storytelling can bring. Storytellers that continue to enrich our lives here and across the world. We are dreamers. We are dream actors. We are the bone and sinew of our international calling, disciples of tradition, past and present, and emerging and of hard traveling. For this talk, what I'd like to do is take you on a personal journey to explore the idea of storytelling, its greater and wider possibilities, when we envision the broader spectrum of storytelling across arts, beyond the arts, and how this translates to peace, social justice, and social change. There's a saying, the world is like a book, and those that do not travel will only ever read the first page. For me, storytelling is a way of traveling the world. Why? Because it enables us to be inspired, to follow our dreams, and to realize that our own stories belong to a world full of stories just waiting to unfold, to be discovered, and to be explored. When we tell and listen to stories, in fact, what we are doing is holding up mirrors to our own diverse, interwoven global cultures, so that we can also realize how we travel in other people's paths very similar to our own. Now, as you can tell from my accent, I'm not actually from Tennessee. In fact, I'm a newly adopted Tennessean. Before that, a Rotary World Peace Fellow based in North Carolina. Before that, an adopted New Scot that lived and worked and made Scotland my home. And before that, an English-born Sikh of British, Asian, Indian, and African descent. Descended from Kampala and Tororo in Uganda, Mombasa, Kenya, and the villages of Hisharpururki and Babasang Santesia in Punjab in northern India. Now, if you're confused, try celebrating Christmas, Eid, Pesach, or Diwali at my house. So although I was born in England, and my mother was born in Kenya, and my father was born in India, and my brother born in Uganda, I've had this long-time belief that not only do I come from a family of storytellers, but I like to think of my own family as a mini United Nations. We've always drawn from global traditions and cross-cultural thinking from as long as I can remember. So let me tell you what inspired the storyteller in me. Growing up in a small southern English town and being the first visible Asian born in that town, I remember I was quite a handful for my teachers and my elders. I was constantly getting into trouble, causing disruption, and annoying my teachers. I was unable to sit still in class or to cooperate in school assemblies. But that was until my head teacher, Mr. George, began to tell stories. Mr. George would tell us tales that came from ancient folk traditions from around the world and stories that came out of his own lifetime. Through his art of storytelling, he sparked my imagination and inspired the dreamer in me and transported me from this small English town to a world that was much, much bigger. One day he told us about the inspirational life of one of his peers, and that man was called Nelson Mandela, who at the time was still imprisoned in Robben Island in South Africa by the apartheid regime. This was in fact the first time I ever heard of Mandela, a man whose life story inspires my work and my life to this day. The stories that Mr. George told us when we were kids helped us to travel across time and space to realize that a much bigger world was out there and we could be part of it. His stories helped me to shape a personal sense of who I was, a child living and growing up in Britain, of Ugandan Asian refugees. His tales revealed to me that I was part of the world and that I too could pursue my dreams and think critically and imagine a future for myself and for others. These first stories allowed me to make a greater sense of my world and my place in it, and to grapple with the challenges then and for what lay ahead. And for as long as I can remember, these stories and new stories I learned helped to shape and enable me to channel anger, discrimination, frustration, and anxiety, and injustice and inequality into forms of storied spoken word and as a slam artist. Because story is my tool, telling is my shield, my sword, my passion, and my inspiration to write, to repeat, and to shape, and to listen when I tell and think storytelling. Stories are the sparks of my life and allow my mind and my soul to connect as one, to go for walks, to wander, to play and roam in my life. Storytelling has given shine to tears, and there have been many, to feel the strength of love around me from strangers and friends, to feel a sense of belonging to place, to connect with communities, to stand alongside storytelling artists wherever and whenever I am in the world. That for me is storytelling. The chance to connect the idea of the oneness of the human family and to seek out common ground. We are continually establishing a sense of who we are and where we are going. Our art form binds us. It helps us to heal and to grow our communities. Wherever we tell, sparks of change may emerge in the hearts of our listeners. Why? Because our world story is constantly evolving, and so are our stories. The idea that when we look beyond divisions and labels and to societies that we live in, when we think beyond borders and groups and allow ourselves to embrace the wider world, we become international citizens of the world, and we start to refigure and reshape our stories with others. In 2001, on a total whim, I moved to Scotland. Now, it's amazing how personal paths and new directions and world events coincide, because not only I, but the world was about to change. On the TV, we sat round and watched Twin Towers collapse. Moments like that we will remember forever. As my country started to engage in this war, I kept checking in on myself around me, because some people were doing things while other people were doing nothing. Soon after, a local mosque and a local synagogue were firebombed, not by each other, but by people that were trying to stamp out difference, to create division, at the heart of community and at the heart of worship. But I decided I was not ready to retreat from my world because it was too important. I started to think beyond my own personal comfort zone. My life in Scotland was becoming redefined not only as a new Scot, but as a global citizen, where every moment and every connection meant something, and I was determined to make a difference. Now, not many people would think, how could a storytelling artist or a story collector like myself, working in the arena of arts and culture, contribute to peace and conflict resolution? But stories provide an anchor, a chance to meet and discuss differences in a safe way, to unpack what it means to belong to a place, to cross a divide, or to have a voice. For me, storytelling is to see art, culture, and the processes of story making not as a tool to conquer or divide, but instead as a way to heal, to come together, and to form community, and to have a voice, to impart ancient wisdom through the tales that we tell, to follow a belief that in fact we are all storytellers. It's just what type of storyteller we want to be. It is, after all, part of our DNA. Because when we think about it, stories let us experience new worlds and give us the power to transcend borders, time, and space. We have told stories from the times when humans picked up colored rocks and etched visual pictographs onto cave walls, to the day when NASA scientists inscribed a visual human story onto a 1972 Pioneer space probe and sent it out into the universe. Storytelling offers us a way to connect to indigenous ways of life, to the organic world, with the forests, mountains, and seas in which our tales take place, to the digital era of storytelling that we're in right now, which has enabled people to tell stories in ways previously thought unimaginable. The art of storytelling has expanded into every field and discipline, from film, television, non-profit and business communities, to live theater and dance and visual arts, law, medicine, peace building, and so on. It's a movement that continues to be on the rise, and as Jimmy Neal Smith, the founder of America's National Storytelling Festival, and my predecessor, talks about, a storytelling revolution that holds meaning in many more ways than perhaps we can ever imagine. Storytelling gives us a chance to provide safe frameworks, to delve into issues that are often difficult to explore. Through storytelling and in my work, I have seen how we can give precedence to historical accountability, to offer healing and reconciliation to the oppressed and to the afflicted, in ways that open hearts of listeners and enable us to share and embrace social change, and think about the connections between social justice, community building, activism, cross-arts alliances, and community building. As we connect storytelling in our work with organizations as diverse as the United Nations, educators, schools, and digital enterprises, to transfer and create complex ideas, peace and education policies into storied form that hold meaning and resonate with people on their own terms. But most importantly, to enable our ancient art form to adapt to change so we can engage with communities in new ways. Storytelling helps us to unravel some of the underlying societal challenges and the foundations for prejudice that exist today. How the idea of racial superiority was often used to justify the desire for profit. How the voices of those sidelined from history refused to conform, to be beaten down by those with power over them. How the small but defiant acts across time became work chants, quilt makers, folk tellers, graffiti artists that told visual stories on subway trains and was used to empower and form communities of their own. How those that managed to put ink to paper, or how artists turned paper to pulp, to those that scribed and scratched and carved story circles into rocks, or circled rocks into sand, to those that turned stories from the margins of society and learned to play lead guitar in the band, and gifted the world with Delta, Mississippi, and Chicago blues, the slam poet, the corrido, the Appalachian ballad, the capoeira dance, the protest Rufi or Rumi song. Because when we think about it, we cannot tackle racism without unpacking the legacies of slavery and oppression in our modern-day institutions or the way that we think. When we think about it, we cannot tackle sexism without unraveling the way that gender has been told in the stories we've heard or the way that we think. When we think about it, we cannot tackle bigotry without looking at the stories of our historical, shared, and global past, or the way that we think. And when we really think about it, we cannot tackle violations of universal human rights without listening to the stories of all those that have been violated, abused, stripped, or raped of their human dignity. The world is imbalanced and troubled, but through the arts of storytelling, we can use the art form to encourage all diverse ways of participating, to engage with classrooms of storytelling enthusiasts from Ghana, Liberia, Shanghai to Sierra Leone, to storytellers that are finding ways to communicate through social media, to the 3 to 4 people currently now living in space. Storytelling is multifaceted. It's what forms relationships with others. It's the single most powerful expressive realm in all its dimensions that gives voice to who we are and where we are going. And used wisely, it may just also be one of the greatest conflict prevention tools, path to nonviolent communication and community as taught by the great Mohandas K. Gandhi, to Dr. Martin Luther King, to the great Madiba and Paul Harris, who told stories and empowered millions to form communities of strength. We remember. Because when we think about it, over time it has been one of the most prolific tools used to divide us, to justify war and enforce persecution. In my own work developing storytelling approaches to societies emerging from conflict, with my colleagues in Belfast in Northern Ireland, or gangs across the city of Glasgow in Scotland, or as part of the peace and reconciliation process, our projects evoked memories and used stories actively collected from people affected by the sectarian troubles. And when the city of Glasgow and my colleagues in Northern Ireland began to invest in storytelling arts and storytellers, they engaged in the storytelling process in healing community to envision a new 21st century identity, not to ignore the past, but instead to reveal it in new ways and as part of a global community. For those emerging from a 30-year war, what we call the Troubles, storytelling was used as one of the most effective ways to sustain a peace process within a divided community. A community that now uses its stories to invite visitors from all over the world and to be part of stories of change. In my own contributions to that work, sometimes as an outsider, as an Asian English-born Sikh living in Scotland, I was able to use storytelling to communicate the connections between racism and sectarianism, to form connections and relationships with community leaders or ex-paramilitary groups, to territorial gang members, to politicians, police officers, and people of different faiths, to collect and tell stories and to encourage them to tell theirs. What might be seen as a mundane, everyday story also offered powerful ways to explore and thread stories together. A program now recognized by UNESCO and the Scottish and Northern Ireland governments, and has around 60,000 people that have participated in it to tackle bigotry and sectarian divisions, gang violence, and ethnic division. But out of conflict, we may hear new stories. I learned that sometimes in tragedy, there are small seeds of hope that give rise to new stories of opportunity. I'm reminded of a time I heard once after 9/11 in New York City when all visits to visit attractions declined, apart from one space, the Islamic galleries of the New York City Metropolitan Museum. Why? Because humans are curious beings. We want to seek out the truth for ourselves. We are smart because we have a desire to learn about cultures we hear about in the news, so we can form our own opinions. And that's why storytelling is important. It enables us to make connections to different beliefs, to ways of life, through family and food ways, to journeys, to understand the different ways and practices of life and our common desire to live in a peaceful and conflict-free world. Storytelling offers us a search for the common ground and a place to find that meeting space, to allow people to seek freedom by starting with freeing our mind, to ignite our imagination, through the power of storytelling from the moment we cry our first cries to the moment we breathe our last breath. But that doesn't mean it's easy. Utilizing the arts takes a level of thick skin and conviction in our art form. The first time I tried to bring in two rival gangs into a museum space to share their stories, they broke out into an all-out war. But through further unpacking and specialist support from partners in other arenas and disciplines, social workers, development officers, police officials, and Rotarians, we developed ways in which fostered storytelling relationships that continue to be used to this day in gang and peace and conflict resolution programming. Storytelling helps us as we refigure, reshape, and redefine our flexible identities, moving from place to place, city to city, or country to country to form new communities. Because when we think about it, how many of us in this room today actually live in the same place as our ancestors? Storytelling artists, storytellers of all kinds, those interested in what storytelling can bring, we offer ways that can help others experience the wisdom of the griot storyteller. The stories that speak of 40,000-year-old civilizations. How can we not listen to that wisdom? Because storytelling teaches us to listen, to see truth through the narrative arc, and feel the essence of what lies behind the story, behind the story, behind the story. Because when we do, the idea of the oneness of the human family is possible. In 2001, following 9/11, and after the attack on the mosque and the synagogue in Edinburgh, through the arts and these expressions of first-person stories, we invited imams and priests and rabbis, Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, Sikhs, Buddhists, and Baha'is to explore faith and belief and identity in the 21st century. But most importantly, it was a chance to come together and embrace community, one another, despite differences. A single event was created through a festival format, where people of faith and secular tradition stood side by side and told their first-person stories, as poets read poetry, Coptic Christians sang songs of resurrection in Arabic. Sikhs wore the Scottish Sikh tartan and performed traditional Bhangra with Scottish bagpipes. And Jewish Scots performed music that combined Scottish Celtic and klezmer tradition. And in the ways that deep meaning and humor often coexist, they named their band Celtica Schmeltica. In that one single event on that day, 6 months after 9/11, 6,000 people of different faiths and backgrounds came together to stand shoulder to shoulder, to use arts, culture, and personal storytelling as a powerful expression of community solidarity at such a time of difficulty. And the great thing that happened, they didn't just want more, they demanded it. Because friendships and stories were made that day. And rather than retreat from mainstream society out of fear of attack, they wanted to come together and not just learn about culture, but to shape it. Whether it's through porch telling, or classroom telling, or festivals of all kinds, or intimate fireplace gatherings, in a meeting place or at a conference, it's a chance to thread stories together to connect with what it means to be human. It doesn't mean it solely has to be about a single place or a single tradition, because stories are constantly crossing borders. It plays a crucial role in binding and helping communities to flourish things that are essential to help us understand how we can improve and better our world. Now, I want again to transport you back to my world now. Remember, I live and work in the United States, in East Tennessee, in a mountain in the Appalachian region. I oversee the work of the International Storytelling Center, including our main flagship event, the National Storytelling Festival, which you're all invited to attend. But remember, I'm not a citizen of this country. 3 years ago was in fact my first National Storytelling Festival, and I witnessed a story that night being told that evening at the Midnight Cabaret by master storyteller Elizabeth Ellis. And she told a story that autumn night that took us on a journey that made us laugh and cry, but then with around 1,500 people present that evening, she closed the evening with a story about a time in American history of internal North and South conflict, when a group of mothers were laying flowered wreaths at the gravestones of their fallen sons, the fallen Confederate sons. They decided also to lay wreaths down at the gravestones of fallen Northern Union soldiers, because in their minds, they too were the children of mothers that lived far away. Now, romantic a story, yes, but this was also a time 3 years ago, during the government shutdown, when the two leading political parties of this country somehow got to a point that they shut down the government. But that event that night brought people and voters from all sides of that divide, people from different religions and social backgrounds, political groups. 65 master tellers from all across the countries that attended, and from all 50 states. But what she did is remind us that no matter what is going on out there, what truly matters in a troubled world is to remember and understand one another, despite our differences. She reminded us to stay connected with what truly is important, to look beyond the labels of difference, borders and barriers and divisions, regardless of who we are, where we come from, or what histories we belong to. In 1972, 4 years before I was born, and actually 1 year before the National Festival in Jonesboro, my own family were forced to flee their homeland in Uganda at gunpoint. They were expelled at a time when all Asians were being expelled by the then dictator Idi Amin. Around 50,000 Ugandan Asians fled the border and settled in new countries. But my dad somehow got offer of a job in England. At this time, they could not take their personal possessions with them, or their objects of faith, or their temples, or their houses, but they could take their traditions and their beliefs, and they found ways to place them in the stories that they told, that they passed on to me and to others. These same stories we use as first-generation British Asians to form a sense of our own identity and to establish our own sense of community. The same stories that as a child I told in school playgrounds to fight off the slurs of racism, and which eventually became my greatest tool of nonviolence, of which I used to shape my own sense of place, a sense of belonging, to build connections with others, and why to this day I'm passionate about the arts of storytelling. I'm also the proud son of refugees, because this has allowed me to value the art of storytelling in all forms, not only as a beautiful form of expression, but as a mechanism for survival. It's enabled me to work with refugees from India, from the Middle East, and in 2007 on a Rotary project in Colombia in South America. But it's also enabled me to connect my love of slam poetry, a contemporary and studied form of oral folklore, and deeply connected to the traditional and oral performance-based storytelling. To connect to these issues I felt compelled to tell, to reflect on and to share. So I want to do that for you now. It's my chance now to slip into my own personal art form, what some call slam poetry or story slam. In 2007, the Rotary International Organization sent me to Colombia, and that's in Latin America. There I had a chance to interact with people displaced by internal conflict, 3 million internal displaced refugees, African Colombians, rural people living in shanty towns on the hills surrounding the hills of Bogota, as they are called by the UN Refugee Agency, IDPs. But to me, they were Miriam, Angel David, and Paula, and many more. They became my family. I became theirs. Before going to Colombia, I only heard of its association with cocaine and violence. This had become its overarching narrative for me. But being there in person, I was able to make personal connections to my own family experiences. One day I was invited up with a Rotary group to the refugee camps up in the hills of Bogota to see a sea of tin and iron and makeshift homes. People invited me into their homes, where I got to listen to their stories. But it was on my return home to Scotland where I started to make the connections and started to see the crafting of these stories, because more than 3 million people back home were displacing themselves to music festivals like Glastonbury, or were hooked on Wimbledon. I went to a music festival in Scotland, and there I saw a sea of makeshift homes across lush green Scottish country landscapes, but no tin roofs, but instead multicolored tents and flags from various parts of Scotland, England, and Ireland. People there had moved out of choice to create a new community at this music festival, but I saw people sipping on fair trade tea, talking about how great our nation was, but yet were taking lines of cocaine openly, oblivious to the fact that every line of cocaine was fueling a war thousands of miles away, back in Colombia, and affecting those people that I had made friends with. It made me think about the connections between fair trade, trade justice, and cocaine. So the slam performances within the genre of storytelling, and it's called There's No Such Thing as Fair Trade Cocaine. I think I'm going to move over here. White lines, choices are going through my brain, but the hypocrisy of it drives me insane. Harmless fun or bullets from a gun. In Colombia, 3 million children live in a slum. White lines, choices, 40 quid a gram. Contradictions and contrasts hit his choices a slam. Pablo Escobar, was he the man? More convincing than that man, Uncle Sam. They both want you, it's a bloody joke. Sam points his finger, Pablo deals coke. Paradoxes exposed, parallels unfold. But the truth of the matter is that the truth is untold. Living in a bubble of champagne and trouble. The coca blood, bodies found in the mud. An exclusive club, USA and Britain. The cocaine hub, putting trade justice, people, rich nations to the test. It's been a European hippie crack fest. The poor get vexed, yuppies indulge in cocaine sex. Across the UK, it's been a middle-class spree, cocaine and chamomile with fair trade tea, going on about being British, how great are we? Rich folk party, having a joke. Charlie sniffs a line of coke. Crystal rock get put to the crush. London bankers get high off the rush. The gumboy pleasure, the middle-class leisure, splitting a line, feeling fine as time. Make up your mind, you want to get high. Why? A million students try like fish in a chowder. There's blood in this powder. Third world voices get louder. You want some more? In Colombia, 10,000 child soldiers are still at war. Question: who exactly, though, is violating humanitarian law? Oxford professors do lines in the loo while indigenous Indians are staging a coup. Ignorance, bliss, look, there it goes. Narcotic dreams, up your nose. The human rights dampened, the violations rampant, the kidnapping and killing. The cities are filling. Organized crime, just a sign of the time. The coca spice, the pimper's paradise. Crockett and Tubbs, Miami Vice. We're meddling and Medellin, the FARC. A prophet in the powder killer, the cocaine gorilla. She rose up at 20, lying in bed. 1,000 magic crystal whizzed past the queen's head. In Colombia, 10,000 dead. White lines, choices going through my brain. There's no such thing as fair trade cocaine. There's no such thing as fair trade cocaine. There's no such thing as fair trade cocaine. Cocaine, cocaine, cocaine. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to remind you, that's a slam poem that was created out of an experience that Rotary supported. Many Rotarians go across the world and they are working in conflict zones. Many Rotarians are meeting the world's greatest challenges. The Rotarians that I met in Colombia were brave enough to go into paramilitary zones and make friends with communities and attack some of the issues that are affected by those communities. And I got to share that experience. I didn't get to share it at a Rotary conference. I get to share that poem on the street corners of New York City at music festivals where people are taking lines of cocaine, to see the connection, how our world is interconnected, how a line of cocaine is fueling a war in another part of the world. We're all interconnected. The last thing I want to just close off with was something that happened to me 2 years ago. Now, I travel a lot. And I often go as a single brown person through many airport customs, which you can imagine, I always get taken for that very extra special questioning. Sometimes why I wear my kilt, because they sometimes have they sometimes are a bit more hesitant when I wear my kilt. It's a little technique. But there was one time, 2 years ago, when I was on my Rotary Peace Fellowship, and I'm coming back from the United Kingdom. I'm at New York City. I'm waiting 3 hours in line. And I knew I would be questioned. I get to the counter, and the US Customs officer, a big, broad man, looks at me, and he asks me the question, "What are you doing?" I told him I was a Rotary Peace Fellow. He handed me back the passport. looked me in the eye and goes, thank you for what you do. We need people like you in the world. But I could say, as an alumni of the Rotary Peace Fellow, a family of 1,000 Rotary Peace Fellows across the world, working from the World Bank, United Nations, to storytelling organizations, countries where our countries are at war. I can say with my hand on my heart is that Rotarians, we need you. It's because of you we are Rotary Peace Fellows. It's because of you we can do what we're doing. And it's because of you I have this belief that to tell a story in this world is more than a human right. It's actually a gift of love that we can use to change the world. So thank you for sharing that love, and thank you for listening to my story.